Dominic Falcone had buried men for less than what he believed his wife had done. He had the DNA report in his hand. He had witnesses. He had everything except the truth. And by the time anyone thought to look for it, Vivian Carter was already gone, already alone, already carrying two lives into the dark, while the man who was supposed to protect her watched from behind iron gates and felt nothing but righteous fury. If you've ever watched someone destroy the best thing in their life with their own two hands, stay until the end. Hit like. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The party was Dominic's idea. Not a celebration exactly. Dominic Falcone didn't celebrate things so much as he announced them. There was a difference, and everyone in his orbit understood it. Celebrations were for people who needed the approval of a crowd. Announcements were for men who owned the crowd and everything the crowd stood on. So when he ordered the east wing of the Falcone estate thrown open on a Thursday evening in late October, when he had the kitchen staff working since noon, when he told Marcus to get the good bottles out of the cellar, the real ones, not the bottles they showed guests, everyone understood that something significant was about to be declared. 53 people moved through the ground floor of the estate that night. Underbosses, lieutenants, lawyers who knew better than to ask questions, accountants who knew better than to answer them, their wives in dark dresses, their associates in dark suits. The whole machine of the Falcone organization, cleaned up and pressed and smelling of money, orbiting the marble foyer like planets around a star they couldn't name but couldn't stop circling. Dominic stood at the center of it in a charcoal suit that had been fitted 3 days ago because he'd gained 7 pounds since the last one and refused to pretend otherwise. He was 41 years old, 6'2", dark hair going silver at the temples in a way that looked less like age and more like something he'd earned. His face was the kind of face that didn't need to do much to communicate what it meant. A stillness in the jaw, a flatness behind the eyes that people read as calm, and were wrong to read that way. It wasn't calm. It was the particular expression of a man who has learned that showing what he feels is a form of weakness he can't afford. He was watching the room the way he always watched rooms, like he was counting exits. Vivian found him at 8:15, when the noise had reached that particular pitch that meant everyone was loose enough to forget they were performing. She came through the crowd without touching it, people partying around her without quite understanding why. She was 34 years old and had the kind of presence that didn't announce itself. It just arrived, and the air in a room rearranged itself accordingly. Dark hair pinned back, a deep green dress that she'd bought herself because she'd learned early that accepting gifts from Dominic's people came with debts she didn't want to carry. She was 4 months along, though you couldn't tell from the way she moved, and she had been rehearsing this moment for 6 days. She stopped beside him, close enough that he could smell her perfume. She didn't look at him immediately, looked instead at the room, and he looked at her the way he always looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, with something almost like hunger, almost like fear, almost like the two things were the same when she was involved. "I need to tell you something," she said. "You've been telling me something for 3 weeks," he said. "Every time I ask what's wrong, you tell me nothing, and then you look like that." "Like what?" "Like you're carrying something you're not sure I can handle." She turned to look at him then, and there was a beat, a half-second where the party noise seemed to pull back, where the whole room seemed to hold itself at a distance. And she said, "We're having twins." He didn't move. "Boys," she said. The doctor confirmed it. 2 heartbeats, 2 boys. Something crossed his face that she would think about for years afterward. She would try to name it, and she couldn't, not exactly. It wasn't joy, though there was something adjacent to joy in it. It was more like the expression of a man who has just been handed something he doesn't know how to hold, something fragile and enormous that he doesn't have the right equipment for. He reached out and put his hand on her face, just cupped her jaw in his palm, thumb against her cheekbone. In 17 years of marriage to Dominic Falcone, she had learned to read him in the silences, and this silence said something she wanted to believe. "2," he said. "2." He nodded. He dropped his hand. He turned to the room. What happened next happened fast, the way things do when they've been engineered to happen fast. Marcus Reyes materialized at Dominic's left shoulder. Marcus was 44. Dominic's second in command for 11 years, a man built like a door and possessed of a particular talent for appearing exactly where he was most needed. He had a glass of something amber in his hand and a look on his face that Vivian had never been able to fully read, somewhere between loyalty and calculation, the two so thoroughly tangled that she wasn't sure Marcus himself could separate them. "Boss," Marcus said. Quiet, meant only for Dominic. "There's something you need to see. Not tonight." "Tonight," Marcus said. I'm sorry. It can't wait." Dominic looked at Vivian. Something shifted in his face. The softness gone, the flatness back, the version of him that had learned to survive in the business he was in. "Give me 10 minutes, he said. She watched him follow Marcus out of the room. She did not know that she was watching something end. The study was on the second floor, away from the noise, and by the time Dominic walked in, there were 3 men waiting. Marcus, Vincent Caruso, the organization's chief financial operator, a compact, gray-eyed man in his 50s who smiled rarely and only when it cost him nothing, and a third man Dominic didn't recognize. Younger, maybe 30, sitting in the chair across from Dominic's desk like he'd been told to sit there and had been afraid to move since. "Who is this?" Dominic said. "His name is Paul," Marcus said. "He's been working security detail at the Meridian property for 8 months. Dominic looked at the young man. "Paul." "Yes, sir." The man's hands were pressed flat against his thighs. He was sweating through his collar. "Tell him what you told us," Marcus said. Paul told him. It came out in fragments, the way things do when a person is terrified of the information they're carrying. 3 months ago, at the Meridian property, Dominic's secondary estate, 40 minutes from the main house, used primarily for storage and the occasional meeting that needed to happen away from the organization's main orbit, Paul had seen something. A car he didn't recognize. A man he didn't recognize. The man had gone inside using a code that hadn't been changed in 2 years, and Paul had noted the plate, noted the time, and kept his mouth shut because in this organization, keeping your mouth shut was the first thing you learned and the last thing you forgot. He'd kept it to himself for 3 months. Until last week, when Marcus had started asking questions during a routine security review, and Paul had made a decision he wasn't sure was the right one. "The man in the car," Dominic said. "You got a description?" "Yes, sir." "Give it." Paul gave it. White male, early 40s, dark blonde hair, a scar through his left eyebrow from what looked like an old cut that hadn't been cleaned properly. Medium build. He'd been carrying a bag when he went in and not carrying it when he came out. Dominic stood very still. Marcus reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed a manila envelope. He placed it on the desk in front of Dominic the way you place something on a table when you already know what it's going to do. "The DNA report," Marcus said. "We had it run independently. 2 separate labs. The results matched." Dominic didn't touch the envelope for a long moment. The party noise drifted up from below, muffled by the floor and the walls, a distant sound of people who didn't know that anything was happening. He picked up the envelope. He opened it. He read what was inside. The party continued below for another 40 minutes before anyone noticed that something had changed. By then, Dominic had read the document 4 times and asked Marcus the same 3 questions repeatedly and gotten the same 3 answers. By then, Vincent Caruso had quietly asked the young man named Paul to wait in another room. By then, the flatness behind Dominic's eyes had become something else entirely, something cold and absolute and wrong in a way that no one in that room was willing to say out loud. Vivian knew something had happened the moment Dominic came back into the room. It wasn't the way he moved. He moved the same way he always moved, deliberate and contained, no wasted motion. It wasn't his face, which showed nothing beyond the familiar stillness. It was something underneath that, something she felt in her chest the way you feel a change in air pressure before weather arrives. A shift in temperature. The wrongness of a man who has made a decision and is now simply carrying it toward its conclusion. He crossed the room toward her. People stepped aside without being asked. He stopped 2 feet in front of her. "We need to talk," he said. "We were just talking." "Somewhere else." She looked at his face. Something in the back of her throat tightened. "Dominic?" "Now, Vivian." The word landed with a weight that made the 2 people nearest to them go quiet without meaning to. She followed him through the crowd and up the stairs to the hallway outside the study, and he closed the door behind them with a softness that was worse than if he'd slammed it. She waited. The Meridian property, he said. You've been there. It wasn't a question, but she treated it like one. Yes, a few times over the summer. You know that. With who? Alone. I go there to… Dominic, what is this? There was a man, he said. Security logged a car, ran the plate. I know who he is. That's not… I don't know who you're talking about. The DNA report… He stopped. He pressed the back of his hand against his mouth for a moment, a gesture she had never seen from him, a crack in the containment. Then he lowered his hand and his voice came out flat and final. The boys aren't mine. The hallway was very quiet. What did you just say to me? She said. 2 separate labs. The report is… What did you just say to me? Her voice was different now. It wasn't elevated. If anything, it was quieter, which was its own kind of violence. She was looking at him with an expression that was trying to be fury and kept falling into something worse. Disbelief. The particular disbelief of a person watching someone they trusted reach into their chest with both hands. Those are your sons, she said. Those boys are yours. The evidence? What evidence? From who? Who gave you this? It doesn't matter who… It matters everything, she said. Her voice cracked on the last word, not with weakness, with the effort of keeping the rest of it contained. Dominic, look at me. Look at my face right now and tell me you believe this. He looked at her face, and the thing that she would never fully recover from, the thing that would sit in the chest of her memory like a stone she couldn't dissolve. He looked at her face, and he looked away. I want you out of this house tonight, he said. What happened next was the kind of thing that people in the Falcone organization would talk about in fragments for years afterward, in the way people talk about disasters they witnessed but can't fully account for. Not because it was violent, there was no violence. That almost made it worse. Violence, at least, is legible. What happened in the Falcone estate that October night was quieter and more absolute than violence. Dominic went back downstairs. He stood in the center of the room, and he spoke loudly enough that the music stopped and the crowd turned. He said that Vivian Carter was no longer his wife. He said that anyone who had contact with her going forward would be considered to have made a choice, and that he respected choices, and that they should respect his. He didn't look at her when he said it. She stood at the top of the stairs, one hand on the railing, and heard every word. She did not cry. Not in front of them. She had made that decision at some point in the 3 minutes between the hallway and the top of the stairs, though she couldn't have told you exactly when. She was going to need everything she had, and she couldn't spend it on this room. She went back to the bedroom. She took her phone, her wallet, her coat. She left the jewelry. She left the dresses. She left everything that had come from his money or his world or the version of herself she'd been trying to construct inside this life. She took a photograph from the dresser, her parents, years ago, before they'd died, and she put it in her coat pocket. She went down the back stairs. Marcus was waiting at the service entrance with 2 men she didn't know. His face was doing the thing it always did, that unreadable combination of loyalty and something else. He said to give you this, Marcus said. He held out an envelope. What's in it? Cash. Enough to… Keep it. Vivian, I said keep it. She walked past him, past the 2 men. Out the service entrance and into the October night, where the air was cold and the sky was overcast, and the city lights bled upward into the clouds and turned the darkness a bruised and sickly amber. She walked for 6 blocks before she let herself feel anything. Then she stopped on a corner, in the cold, with her hand pressed flat over her stomach, and she stood there and let the whole thing crash over her like a wave she'd been holding back for the last 40 minutes. The grief and the fury and the particular anguish of a person who has been lied about to the one person who should have known better, who should have looked at her face in that hallway and known better. She stood on that corner for 4 minutes. Then she straightened. Then she breathed. Then she picked a direction and started walking. She never looked back at the estate. The twins were born in March, at a hospital 3 states away, in a city where no one knew her name, and she'd rented a room in a house owned by a retired schoolteacher named Grace, who asked few questions and had a porch where Vivian could sit in the evenings and watch the street go quiet. She named them Landon and Logan. Carter, not Falcone. She made that choice deliberately and without resentment. It wasn't about erasing their father, it was about protecting them from a name that would, at this point in her life, only bring them harm. Landon came first, screaming immediately, which the nurses said was a good sign. 7 pounds 4 ounces, with a shock of dark hair and a grip that clamped around the nurse's finger like something mechanical. He stopped screaming the moment Vivian held him and turned his face toward her voice with an expression of focused intensity that would remain, in various forms, the defining feature of his personality for the rest of his life. Logan came 4 minutes later, quieter, wide-eyed, looking at the ceiling with an expression that seemed, even then, to be cataloging something. Smaller by 6 ounces. He took slightly longer to breathe right, and the 47 seconds between the moment he arrived and the moment he fully cried were the longest 47 seconds of Vivian's life up to that point. She lay in the hospital bed afterward with one of them on each side of her and looked at their faces in the thin morning light coming through the window and understood, for the first time and with a clarity that hit her like cold water, exactly what she was going to do with the rest of her life. She was going to make sure these boys survived, not just physically, though that too, obviously, always that. But she was going to make sure they survived into something, into men who knew who they were. Men who knew what truth cost and why it was worth the price. Men who would not make the mistake their father made. She was going to raise them in the wreckage of a betrayal she hadn't caused and couldn't fix. And she was going to do it without poisoning them against the man who'd caused it. Because hatred is a kind of inheritance, and she refused to pass it on. That was the plan. It was not a simple plan. Set. The years that followed were not easy, and Vivian never pretended otherwise. She was good with money, better than anyone in the Falcone organization had given her credit for, which was their mistake and eventually, in small ways, her advantage. She had a degree in accounting that she'd never fully used inside the marriage, and she understood numbers the way some people understand music, intuitively and at depth. She found work inside a year, first at a small firm doing bookkeeping, then at a larger one doing analysis, then consulting, then eventually running the finances for a regional logistics company whose owner was too busy to ask where she'd come from and smart enough to trust the numbers she produced. She rented a house when the boys were 2, bought one when they were 6, a modest thing in a mid-sized city with decent schools and streets quiet enough that she could hear cars turning onto the block at night. She had a garden in the back that she was terrible at, but maintained out of principle. She had 2 colleagues she considered friends. She had Grace, the retired school teacher, who drove 4 hours to visit twice a year and sat on the back porch and told the boys stories about their mother's first year in that rented room, the way she'd been so fierce and so exhausted all the time, the way she'd read to them every night even before they could understand the words. What she did not have was anyone who could take the weight off her when she was too tired to carry it. She managed. The boys were, from the beginning, something, not in the way that parents say that about children to make themselves feel better. In the actual, observable way, the kind that made their teachers take her aside at conferences and search for language adequate to what they were seeing. Landon was relentless. He attacked problems the way a storm attacks a coast, not with subtlety, with sheer sustained force. He was the kind of student who would ask a teacher to explain something and then, if the explanation was insufficient, explain it better himself. He had Dominic's stillness and Vivian's exactness and a stubbornness that belonged to no one but himself. Logan was different. Logan was the kind of person who listened to a room when he entered it before he said a word, who noticed things that other people's eyes slid past, who could sit across from someone for 30 minutes and tell you afterward what that person was afraid of. He had his mother's precision and something else that she couldn't quite name, a patience, a long patience, the patience of someone who understands that most of the important things in a life happen slowly and can't be rushed. They fought, the way brothers fight, which is to say constantly and over nothing, and with a ferocity that looked alarming from the outside and was, in practice, a form of love so deep that neither of them had language for it. They finished each other's sentences. They communicated in the glances and silences that develop between people who have shared every room since before they were born. When Logan was 17 and Landon told him something was a bad idea, Logan stopped. When Landon was uncertain, rare, but it happened, Logan was the only one who could tell. Vivian watched them grow and felt, alongside the ordinary pride of a mother, a particular and private grief, that the man who should have seen this was missing all of it. That somewhere, in a city she'd left behind, Dominic Falcone was running his empire and carrying his version of the truth and had no idea what he'd thrown away. She didn't say this to the boys, she said other things. She said, "Your father is a complicated man, and I am not going to simplify him for you." She said, "The story of how we got here isn't finished yet, and I don't have all of it, and you deserve the whole truth when it exists." She said, "There are things I know and things I believe and things I suspect, and I'm going to be honest with you about which is which." She did not say, "He chose to believe a lie over looking at my face." She did not say, "I have thought about that moment in the hallway every single day since." She did not say, "I still don't know if he was a bad man or just a weak one, and I have decided that the distinction matters less than making sure you don't repeat it." Patik. The illness came the way illness comes, slowly and then all at once. She'd been tired for 2 years before she said anything to a doctor. Tired in a way she'd attributed to work and single parenthood and the accumulated weight of 17 years of building something from nothing. When she finally had it looked at, she was 51, and the oncologist was gentle and thorough and gave her the kind of careful language that meant the news was not good. She did not tell the boys for 3 months, not because she was protecting them. She'd decided years ago that protecting them from hard truths was a form of disrespect, but because she needed the 3 months to figure out how to say it in a way that did not make them feel like the ground was giving way beneath them. When she told them, Landon sat with his hands on his knees and his jaw tight and said nothing for a long time and then said, "What do you need us to do?" Logan asked the oncologist 17 questions over the course of an hour, wrote down every answer, and spent the next week reading everything he could find about the diagnosis and the treatment protocols. They both came to every appointment. They both argued with her when she pushed back against treatment she found exhausting and invasive, and they were right to argue, and she let them win because they were right, and also because watching them fight for her was one of the harder and more extraordinary things she'd ever witnessed. She had 4 years, not as many as she wanted, more than some people get. Near the end, when the boys were 17 and she was running out of time and they both knew it, she told them about the letters. She had kept them in a box that lived at the back of the top shelf of her bedroom closet, behind spare blankets and a winter coat she hadn't worn in 6 years. The box was unremarkable, gray cardboard, the kind that office supplies come in. Inside were letters, some handwritten and some printed, spanning 17 years. Documents, copies of things she'd quietly gathered over the years through channels she'd rather not explain and at costs she'd considered carefully. "I didn't want you to know until you were ready," she said. Her voice was thinner now, but the precision in it hadn't changed. "And I didn't know if I'd be here to explain them when you were ready. So I'm doing it now." She walked them through it. Not everything. She didn't have everything. But enough. Enough to show that the DNA report had been forged and that the forgery pointed back to 2 specific men inside the Falcone organization, and that those men had motive, real motive, not manufactured, to remove her from the picture. Enough to show that Dominic had not been a man who simply chose a lie over his wife, but a man who had been handed a lie so carefully constructed that it looked indistinguishable from truth. This did not make it forgivable, she said. She was clear about that. A man who cannot look at the face of the woman he's supposed to know, truly know, and see through the lie being told to him. That is a kind of failure, and the failure is his, and it had consequences that real people paid real prices for. But, she said, it was not what she'd spent 17 years believing it was. The organization has been bleeding him, she said. I've been watching from a distance. The men who framed me are running it now, slowly. He doesn't see it, or he sees parts of it and doesn't understand what he's seeing. Landon looked at the papers in his hands. What do you want us to do with this? Nothing, she said. Not while I'm alive. After. She looked at both of them, her sons, grown now and impossible, and hers. After, if you choose to. Not for me. Not for revenge. For truth, if you think truth is worth the cost. She died on a Tuesday morning in late spring, at home, which was what she'd wanted. The box went to Landon. He sat with it for 3 weeks. He didn't open it. Then Logan came to his room one evening and sat down across from him and said, "We need to go." Landon looked up. "To the city," Logan said, "to find out what actually happened." A long pause. Outside, the street was quiet. Somewhere distant, a car passed and its headlights swept briefly across the ceiling. "Not revenge," Landon said. "No," Logan said. "Truth." Another pause. "She said it might cost us," Landon said. "Most things worth it do," Logan said. Landon reached over and picked up the box. He turned it in his hands once. He set it down. "Okay," he said. They left the following week with the box and their mother's letters and the specific quiet courage of 2 young men who had been raised to value truth above comfort by a woman who had paid the highest price for that value and never once suggested it wasn't worth it. Behind them, the house stood empty. Ahead of them, 3 states away, in a city Vivian had left 17 years ago, a man who did not know his sons existed was losing an empire to the same men who had taken his family. He just didn't know it yet. They drove through the night and into the morning, trading off at the wheel every 2 hours without discussing it, the way they did most things, by feel, by the unspoken calibration that had been developing between them since before they had words. Landon drove the first stretch with both hands on the wheel and his jaw set and his eyes fixed on the road ahead with the particular intensity of a man who is using the act of driving to avoid thinking about what he's driving toward. Logan sat in the passenger seat with the gray box on his lap and the window cracked 2 inches and said almost nothing for the first 100 miles. The highway was empty at that hour, just headlights and dark and the occasional bloom of a gas station at an off-ramp, fluorescent and strange in the pre-dawn black. Around the 3-hour mark, somewhere in the featureless middle stretch between their city and the one they were heading toward, Logan opened the box. He didn't ask. Landon didn't tell him not to. Logan went through it slowly, the way he went through everything, methodically, without rushing, reading each document fully before setting it aside. Landon watched him from the corner of his eye, watched the way Logan's expression didn't change much, but his breathing did, a barely perceptible tightening around the ribcage that Landon had learned to read years ago as the sign that Logan was processing something that cost him something. "The 2 names," Logan said finally. "Yeah. Vincent Caruso and a man named Reyes, Marcus Reyes." "I saw. Mom had copies of their financials going back 12 years. These are transfers that don't track to any legitimate revenue source inside the organization. She annotated them." Logan held up a page. In the margin, in their mother's careful handwriting, a single note: "Follow the money away from D. It goes to them." Landon's hands tightened on the wheel, not in anger, or not only in anger. In the specific frustration of a person looking at a map of a disaster that had already happened, that cannot be undone, that can only be understood. "She never told us," he said. "She told us what she knew when she knew it," Logan said. "She didn't know all of this until later. Some of these are dated 4 years ago. She was sick 4 years ago. She was sick and still piecing it together." Logan set the page down. He looked at the road. That's who she was. They stopped for gas and bad coffee at a truck stop outside a town that didn't seem to have a reason to exist beyond the highway that ran through it. Landon stood at the pump in the cold morning air, and Logan went inside and came back with 2 paper cups and a silence that said he'd been thinking hard in the 2 minutes he'd been alone. "When we get there," Logan said, "we need to be careful about who we talk to first. We're not talking to anyone first. We're watching." "For how long?" "However long it takes to understand what we're walking into." Logan wrapped both hands around his cup. He looked at the flat gray sky. "She said the organization has been bleeding, that Caruso and Reyes are running it now. If that's true, they're going to see 2 strangers asking questions about Dominic Falcone as a problem they need to solve." "Then we don't ask questions about Dominic Falcone," Landon said. "Not directly. Not at first. And when directly becomes necessary?" Landon drank his coffee. It was terrible. "Then we deal with it." They got back in the car. Yent. The city announced itself through the windshield the way cities do. A gradual brightening of the horizon, then the first clusters of light, then the skyline materializing out of the morning haze like something that had been there all along and was only now consenting to be seen. Neither of them had been here before. Their mother had never brought them, which they had understood without being told. Some distances exist for reasons. They had a name from the documents, a lawyer, a man named Arthur Pell, who appeared in their mother's notes with annotations that were notably different in tone from the others. Where she'd written about Caruso and Reyes with the clipped precision of someone transcribing evidence, her notes on Pell had a different quality. Quiet, she'd written beside his name once. Careful, stayed out of it. Possibly the only one in that room who wasn't sure. They found him through his firm's public listing, a small operation on the east side of the city, 2 names on the door, the kind of practice that handled wills and property disputes and stayed studiously away from the kind of clients who ended conversations in ways that couldn't be appealed. They sat in his waiting room for 20 minutes while a receptionist, who was trying very hard not to look at them, made phone calls she pretended were about other things. Then Arthur Pell came to his office door. He was 63, thinner than the photograph on the firm's website, which was several years old. He had the face of a man who had spent a long career being careful, and the eyes of a man who was being careful right now, in this moment, looking at these 2 young men in his waiting room who had given his receptionist a last name that had made her check twice before she wrote it down. "Come in," he said. They came in. He closed the door. He did not sit immediately, stood instead with his back to the window and looked at them both for a long moment. Looking, Landon understood, not just at their faces, but at the fact of them. 2 of them. The same height, the same dark hair, the same bone structure that was, whether any of them liked it or not, unmistakably Falcone. "Your mother," Pell said. "She died 6 weeks ago," Logan said. Pell sat down, slowly, like a man absorbing weight. "I didn't know. We didn't expect you to. She was—" He stopped, rearranged whatever he'd been about to say into something more careful. "She was the most precise person I ever dealt with, and I've dealt with some extremely precise people." "You knew her," Landon said. "Not well, not personally. She contacted me twice over the years, discreetly. She had questions about certain financial structures within the Falcone organization, and she wanted answers from someone who wouldn't report the inquiry." He looked at his desk. "I told her what I could without crossing lines I wasn't willing to cross." "And the lines you were willing to cross?" A pause. Pell looked at Landon the way older men sometimes look at younger ones when they recognize something in them that they'd rather not deal with. "Why are you here?" "To understand what happened," Logan said, "and to do something about it. Define something." "We have documentation," Landon said. 17 years of it. Forged DNA results, financial transfers pointing to Caruso and Reyes, evidence of a conspiracy that removed our mother from this family and has been slowly gutting the Falcone organization ever since. We want to know if that documentation is enough to do what needs to be done, and we want to know from someone who knows this world well enough to tell us the truth about it." Pell was quiet for a long time. "How old are you?" he said. 17, Logan said. Another pause. "Your mother raised you." "She did. And she sent you here." "She gave us the choice," Landon said. "We made it ourselves." Pell stood up. He went to a filing cabinet and opened the bottom drawer and removed a folder that had been sitting there, Landon noticed, without a label on the tab. He set it on the desk between them. "I've been keeping my own records," Pell said, "for 9 years. Not because I expected to use them, because in this business, keeping records is how you stay alive, and I have been very interested in staying alive." He pushed the folder toward them. "What you have and what I have together might be enough." "Might. The organization right now it's not stable. Caruso's been making moves. Reyes is unpredictable in ways that weren't true 5 years ago. And Dominic, what about him?" Landon said. Pell looked at him directly. "He's not the man he was. He's been losing things for 17 years and he knows it, and he can't identify the source of the bleeding, and that's made him paranoid in ways that are making it easier for Caruso and Reyes, not harder. He doesn't trust his own judgment anymore. Landon sat back. Logan was very still. He deserves that, Landon said. Maybe, Pell said. But you came here for truth. That's part of it. Mom. They found a room in a mid-tier hotel 8 blocks from the Falcone organization's primary offices, a building that presented itself to the world as a real estate investment firm and was, in practice, exactly that, alongside being several other things that the real estate filings didn't mention. They paid cash. They used names that were not their names. They ate at a diner on the corner that had been there since before either of them was born and smelled like grease and decades, and the particular honesty of a place that had never tried to be anything except what it was. They spent 2 days watching. Logan was better at this than Landon, and Landon knew it, and it was one of the few things between them that Landon couldn't quite make peace with. Not with envy, exactly, but with the frustration of a person who is very good at things and has a brother who is better at the specific things he's worst at. Logan could sit in a coffee shop across the street from the Falcone building for 3 hours looking like a person who was simply waiting for someone, not watching anything, not marking anything. He'd come back to the hotel room and reconstruct what he'd seen with a precision that made Pell's files suddenly make more sense. Caruso arrived at 9 every morning in a black car. He was accompanied by 2 men who rotated on a 2-day schedule. He stayed until 6, sometimes 7. He moved with the comfort of a man who considers himself the primary resident of a space, not a visitor. Reyes was less predictable. He came and went at irregular intervals. He moved fast. He had a short-range phone call every afternoon at 2 that he took outside on the building's side entrance, turned away from the street, hand cupped around his mouth. He looked, Logan said, like a man who was managing something he didn't want managed for him. The 3rd day Landon made contact. Not with Caruso or Reyes. That would come later, and on terms they controlled. He went to the building, walked through the front entrance with the gray box under his arm and the specific posture of a person who belongs where they're standing, and asked the woman at the front desk to tell Vincent Caruso that Dominic Falcone's son was in the lobby. The woman looked at him. "Sons," Landon said. "Tell him sons." She made a call. She kept her face professional and her voice steady. Landon stood in the lobby and felt his pulse in his throat and thought about his mother standing on a corner in October 17 years ago with her hand over her stomach. 3 minutes passed. A man came down. Not Caruso. A lieutenant, mid-30s, built like someone who'd spent a serious amount of time making himself large and not much time making himself smart. He stopped 6 feet from Landon and looked at him with the specific expression of a man who has been told to assess a threat level and is not sure what he's assessing. "Who are you?" he said. "I told the woman at the desk." "Tell me." "Landon Carter. Vivian Carter was my mother. Dominic Falcone is my father." He looked at the man with an evenness he did not entirely feel. "I'd like to speak with whoever is running things in this building." "Nobody's running things in this building except Caruso," Landon said. "I know. That's who I'm asking for." A pause. The man's jaw tightened. "Wait here." He went back upstairs. Landon waited. 8 minutes. Then the man came back down with someone else behind him. Older, compact, gray-eyed. The particular stillness of a man who had spent 40 years learning not to show what he was thinking. Vincent Caruso stopped 10 feet away and looked at Landon the way you look at something you weren't expecting and are rapidly reclassifying. "Vivian Carter's son," Caruso said. "That's right." "And you say Dominic Falcone is your father." "I don't say it. It's a fact." Landon held his gaze. "I have documentation if you need it." Something moved in Caruso's eyes. Very fast, very controlled. If Landon hadn't been watching for it, he would have missed it, but he'd been raised by a woman who had taught him, among other things, that the most important things people communicate are the things they're trying not to show. What he saw in Caruso's eyes was not surprise. It was calculation. "Where have you been?" Caruso said. "Away." "Your mother died 6 weeks ago," Landon said. "Which is why I'm here now." Another calculation. Caruso glanced at the man beside him, a glance that communicated something Landon couldn't fully read but filed. "This isn't the right place for this conversation," Caruso said. "I agree. I'd like to speak with Dominic Falcone directly." "Mr. Falcone doesn't take meetings with his sons?" Landon let that sit for a beat. "Tell him, see what he says." Caruso looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "Give me a number." "I'll call you," Landon said. "Tomorrow." He turned and walked back out through the front entrance, and he did not let himself breathe fully until he was half a block away, and the glass doors had closed behind him. Logan was waiting at the hotel. He'd seen it, or enough of it, from his position down the street. "Caruso," Landon said. He sat down on the edge of the bed. His hands were steadier than he expected. He knew, not that we existed maybe, but the moment I said who I was, he wasn't surprised. He was calculating. "He was deciding whether you're a problem," Logan said. "We are a problem." "Yes." Logan sat down across from him. "We need to move faster than I thought. Pell said Dominic comes to the building on Thursdays for what they call the board review. That's tomorrow. We don't have an invitation." "We don't need one," Landon said. "We need Caruso to do what Caruso is going to do." Logan looked at him. "You think he'll tell Dominic?" "No, I think he won't. I think whatever he tells his people tonight, it won't include the part where Dominic's son showed up in his lobby. Because if Dominic knows we exist, the whole frame collapses," Logan said. 17 years of it. So he's going to try to handle us before tomorrow's meeting. A silence. "How?" Logan said. "I don't know yet." Landon looked at his hands. "But we should assume it won't be a conversation." The call came at 11 that night. The number was blocked. Logan answered because they'd agreed Landon's voice was already known. The man on the other end didn't introduce himself. He said, "The people you spoke with today would like to continue the conversation. There's a location. Tonight, midnight, an address in the warehouse district on the south end of the city. Come alone," meaning one of you. "Bring the documentation you mentioned." Logan said, "We'll consider it." He hung up. They looked at each other. "Warehouse district," Landon said. "Midnight." "One of us," Logan said, meaning they want to separate us. Or they want to see if we're stupid enough to go. "We're not going," Logan said. "No." Landon picked up his phone. "But we're going to make sure Pell knows exactly what was offered and exactly what time." He paused. "And we're going to be at that building tomorrow morning when Dominic Falcone arrives, whether we're invited or not." Logan looked out the window at the city below. 17 years of distance compressed into 48 hours. Their mother's box sitting on the desk between two lamps, gray and ordinary, and containing the architecture of everything. "Landon," he said. "Yeah. Whatever happens tomorrow." He didn't finish the sentence immediately. He let it breathe. "We don't go in angry." Landon looked at him. "She raised us better than that," Logan said. "We go in with the truth, and we let the truth do what she always said it does." "And if the truth isn't enough?" Logan turned from the window. His face was the particular stillness of a person who has already made peace with a cost they haven't paid yet. "Then we make it enough," he said. Outside, the city moved through its midnight hour, indifferent and continuous, carrying its own weight of things that had been buried and were working their way back to the surface, the way things always do, the way truth always does, slowly and then all at once. And in a building 12 blocks away, a man who had been told there were two strangers asking questions picked up a phone and made a call that would, by morning, put 3 armed men between those strangers and the door they were trying to walk through. They didn't sleep. Not really. Landon lay on top of the covers with his shoes still on and stared at the ceiling and ran the variables until they stopped being variables and started being certainties, the way math becomes certain when you've checked it enough times that doubting it is its own kind of stupidity. Logan sat at the desk with Pell's folder open and their mother's documents arranged around it in a pattern that made sense to him and would have made sense to her, and would have looked, to anyone else, like the organized chaos of a person who thinks in systems. At 3 a.m, Logan said, "There's a gap." Landon turned his head. "Where?" "The DNA report. Mom had the forgery documented. The lab, the technician, the chain of custody that was broken. But she only had one of the two lab results. She notes it here. He tapped a page. She writes, "Second lab result, cannot locate. Destroyed or buried deeper than I can reach." We have the first. The first is enough to show the forgery. But in a room full of people whose salaries depend on the story staying buried, one document is an argument, two documents is proof. Landon sat up. Pell. He might have it. Or he might know who does. Landon checked the time. "We can't call him at 3. "No," Logan said, "but we can call him at 6. They called him at 6. Pell answered on the second ring, which meant he either hadn't slept either or had been expecting the call. "The second lab result," Logan said. "Do you have it?" A pause that lasted exactly long enough to mean something. "Where did you find the gap?" "Our mother's notes." Another pause. "I have a copy," Pell said. "I've had it for 6 years. I got it from a lab technician who was approached by Caruso's people to destroy the original and was smart enough to make a copy before he complied. He gave it to me because he needed someone to hold it who wasn't inside that organization, and he trusted me slightly more than he trusted his own conscience." "We need it today," Landon said. "I know," Pell said. "That's why I already have it in my briefcase." A beat. "I heard about the midnight call. I assumed you didn't go." "We didn't." "Good. It means they're nervous but not yet committed to something permanent. That window is smaller than you think." He paused. "The board review is at 10. Dominic arrives between 9:30 and 9:45. If you're going to do this today, and I think today is the right day, I think waiting gives them time to build something you can't walk through. You need to be in that building before Caruso's people are positioned to stop you." "We'll be there at 9, Logan said. "I'll meet you at the side entrance. There's a security supervisor named Hewitt who has been with Falcone for 22 years and has watched the last 4 years with the expression of a man who is very tired of what he's watching. I called him this morning." Another pause, this one quieter. "He'll let you in." Landon looked at Logan. Logan looked at Landon. "Pell," Landon said, "why are you doing this?" The line was quiet for a moment. Then Pell said, "Because I was in that building 17 years ago. I was at that party. And I watched what happened, and I told myself it wasn't my business, and I have been living with that ever since." A breath. "Some debts you pay late, or you don't pay at all. I'd rather pay late." He hung up and checked. They were outside the building at 8:50. The morning was overcast, the kind of flat gray sky that gives a city a quality of held breath, everything suspended, waiting for a direction. Logan had the documents in a leather portfolio they'd bought the previous afternoon. Their mother's papers, Pell's folder, the annotated financials, the forgery evidence arranged in the sequence that told the clearest story. Landon carried nothing. He'd made that choice deliberately. Walking into a room with documents was a presentation. Walking in with nothing but himself was something else. Hewitt was at the side entrance at 9 exactly. He was 50-ish, heavy through the shoulders, with a face that had been worn down to its essential structure by years of doing difficult things inside an organization that didn't encourage questions. He looked at both of them for a moment, and something moved in his face that wasn't sentiment exactly, but was adjacent to it. "You look like him," Hewitt said. Not to either of them specifically, to the fact of them. "We've been told," Logan said. Hewitt held the door. "The boardroom is on the 4th floor. Caruso gets there at 9:45 to set up. You've got a window." He paused. "There are 2 men I don't recognize on the 3rd floor who arrived an hour ago and aren't on any schedule I was given. I want you to know that." "Caruso's," Landon said. "Most likely." "3rd floor," Logan said. "We're going to 4. "The elevator or the stairs?" "Stairs," Landon said. Quieter. Hewitt nodded. He looked like a man who had made a decision he'd been sitting on for years and was discovering that the moment of making it felt less dramatic and more simply correct than he'd expected. "Your father arrives at 9:35 today. He's early sometimes. I'll call you when his car pulls up." "Thank you," Logan said. Hewitt looked at him. "Don't thank me yet." The fourth-floor boardroom was large and corporate, in the specific way of rooms that are meant to communicate legitimacy. Long table, high-backed chairs, windows on the north wall looking out over the city's mid-rise skyline. The Falcone name wasn't on anything in the room. It didn't need to be. The weight of it was in the architecture, in the quality of the wood and the glass, in the particular silence of a room that had witnessed too many decisions to be comfortable. They were inside it by 9:10. Logan went directly to the table and set up the documents with the focused efficiency of someone who has rehearsed this in his head enough times that the physical action is just the final draft. He organized them in 3 groupings across the center of the table, oriented toward the head chair, with space on either side for the people who would need to see them. He was precise about it. He treated each page with the care their mother had treated everything, as if it mattered, as if the act of handling truth carelessly was its own kind of dishonesty. Landon stood at the window and watched the street below. At 9:32, Hewitt called. "He's here." 3 minutes later, the elevator opened. Dominic Falcone walked into his own boardroom and stopped. He was 58 years old. He'd put on weight through the middle in the way of men who have stopped moving as much as they used to, but the frame was still there, the height, the breadth through the shoulders, the posture of a man who has never in his adult life felt the need to make himself smaller. His hair was fully silver now. His face was the face from their mother's photograph, older, carved down to harder angles, with the specific exhaustion of a man who has been suspicious for so long that the suspicion has become structural, load-bearing, the thing holding him together rather than something he chooses to carry. He looked at the two of them. He looked at them the way Hewitt had looked at them, but slower, and with something underneath it that Hewitt hadn't had, a recognition that started somewhere physical, somewhere below the level of thought, the body knowing something before the mind had assembled the evidence. "Who are you?" he said. His voice was lower than Landon had expected, quieter. "My name is Landon Carter," Landon said. He was standing 6 feet from the man, and his voice came out level, and he was proud of that. "This is my brother Logan. Our mother was Vivian Carter." The room was extremely quiet. Dominic's face did not collapse. It didn't do anything sudden or dramatic. It did something slower, and in some ways worse. It went very still, the way a face goes still when it is receiving information that it does not have adequate preparation for, when the body's instinct is to stop everything and simply hold. "Vivian," he said. "She died 6 weeks ago," Logan said. "Cancer. She was 51. A breath, a single audible breath from a man who Landon suspected had not made an audible involuntary sound in public in 20 years. "You said—" Dominic stopped. He looked at Landon. "You said Carter." "She raised us under her name," Landon said. "Her choice. It was the right one at the time." At the time. Something shifted in Dominic's expression, not toward anger, but toward something more complicated than anger, the thing that lives on the other side of it when there isn't a clean target. "You came here." "We came here," Logan said, "because she left us documentation, 17 years of it, and she gave us the choice of what to do with it." He gestured toward the table. "These are the documents. We'd like you to look at them before anyone else comes into this room." Dominic looked at the table. He looked at the organized rows of papers and folders laid out across the mahogany with a care that was evident even from where he stood. He looked at his sons. He walked to the table. He picked up the first document and read it. He set it down and picked up the second. He read through the forgery evidence slowly, the way a man reads something he is trying to find an error in and failing. His breathing changed partway through. Not dramatically, but Landon heard it. The almost imperceptible shift from controlled to something that was working very hard to stay controlled. He got to the financial transfer records. He stopped. He stood with that page in his hand for a long time. "Caruso," he said. It wasn't a question. It was the sound of a man arriving at a destination he now understood he'd been walking toward for years without knowing it. "And Reyes," Landon said. Dominic set the page down. He put both hands flat on the table. His head dropped forward slightly, not in defeat, in the posture of a man who is looking at the surface beneath his hands and seeing something that isn't there. A hallway, maybe, 17 years ago, a face he'd looked at and looked away from. The DNA report, he said. Forged, Logan said. We have documentation on both labs. The second result was buried. A technician kept a copy. Who? Pell has his name. Dominic's head came up. Pell. He's been keeping records for 9 years, Landon said. He was at the party. He said he didn't say anything and has been living with it since. Something crossed Dominic's face at that. A flicker of something that might, in another man, have been called grief, but in him registered as a kind of reckoning, the expression of a person watching the full architecture of a mistake reveal itself from foundation to roof. The door opened. Vincent Caruso walked in at 9:43, 2 minutes ahead of his usual time, with a man behind him that neither Landon nor Logan recognized. Caruso took 4 steps into the room before he registered what he was seeing. Dominic at the table, the document spread across it, and the 2 young men standing on the other side. He stopped. His face did what faces do when they've been trained to conceal things and encounter something they weren't prepared to conceal for. It went careful. Very carefully, very quickly, it assembled itself into an expression of measured neutrality that was, to anyone paying attention, its own confession. Vincent, Dominic said. His voice was different now, not louder, colder. Boss? Caruso looked at Landon and Logan with an expression that was doing its best to seem unfazed. I wasn't aware there would be guests at the review. They're not guests, Dominic said. Come in, close the door. Caruso didn't move for a moment. The man behind him, younger, thick through the neck, the specific build of a man employed for physical rather than intellectual utility, stayed where he was. Close the door, Vincent, Dominic said again. Quieter this time, which was worse. Caruso came in. The door closed. He looked at the documents on the table with the specific expressionlessness of a man who is reading the end of his own story and declining to react to it. These are lies, Caruso said. Sit down, Dominic said. Whatever these 2 told you, sit down. Caruso sat. What followed was not an interrogation in any formal sense. There was no procedure to it, no structure. It was the thing that happens when a man who has spent his professional life never losing control of a room suddenly finds that the ground beneath the room is not what he thought it was. Dominic went through the documents. He asked Caruso direct questions. He did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. The quality of the silence in the room was doing more work than volume could have. Caruso denied everything with the consistency of a man who has rehearsed denial until it functions independently of what he actually believes. He cited sources, questioned authenticity, constructed alternative explanations in real time with the practiced fluency of someone who has been preparing for this conversation in one form or another for years. But he was doing it in front of Dominic, and Dominic was doing what he had failed to do 17 years ago in a hallway with a different person. He was looking at the face across from him, and he was seeing it. The night of the party, Dominic said, you came to me. You had the report ready. I came to you with what I'd been given. You had it ready, Dominic said. The timing, the witness, the envelope, it was... He stopped. He looked at the table. It was ready before she told me about the boys. A silence. Caruso's expression shifted by a fraction of a degree in a direction that wasn't neutral anymore. You knew, Dominic said. You knew she was pregnant. You knew what she was going to tell me. You timed it so I'd hear it the same night. He looked up from the table. You needed the news to be poisoned. You needed me to hear twins and already be holding a lie that made the twins mean something else. The man behind Caruso moved slightly. Logan noticed it. A subtle shift in weight, a repositioning that wasn't casual. Logan stepped to the left, 2 steps, which put him between that man and the table, which put him in a position to see both the man and the door. Landon saw Logan move and understood why. The boys, Caruso said, and his voice had changed now, the smoothness gone, something underneath it that was harder and less managed. They walk in here with papers and you're going to take their word over. I'm not taking their word, Dominic said. I'm looking at your face. He stood up from the table. I looked at her face in the hallway that night. I looked at it, and I looked away because you'd given me something that felt like certainty, and certainty was easier than her face. His voice was still controlled, but the control had a different quality now. Not the flatness of a man suppressing feeling, but the deliberate precision of a man choosing his words because he understands their weight. I have been looking away from that moment for 17 years. I am not looking away from this one. Caruso stood up. He was no longer bothering with neutrality. You bring two strangers into this building and lay them at my door based on documents that any competent forger— Pell, Logan said. Caruso went silent. Arthur Pell has been holding a copy of the second lab result for 6 years, Logan said. The technician who made the copy before he destroyed the original is still alive. The chain of custody on the forgery is documented across 4 sources, 3 of which are independent of each other and of us. He looked at Caruso steadily. The steadiness cost him something, but he spent it. You can call every one of those sources a liar. You'd be adding to a number that's already too large to be credible. The man behind Caruso took another step. Landon moved, not toward the man, toward the door. He opened it in one motion, and Hewitt was in the hallway, because Hewitt had been in the hallway for the last 11 minutes. And behind Hewitt were 2 other men with Falcone organization credentials, who had evidently made the same decision Hewitt had made and were tired of sitting on it. The man behind Caruso looked at the 3 people in the doorway and made a calculation that came out correctly, which was that the calculation wasn't in his favor. Vincent, Dominic said. Caruso was standing in the center of the room with the documents on the table to his left, and Dominic in front of him, and the door held open behind him, and the particular expression of a man who has just watched an architecture he's been building for 17 years begin to come down. You can't, he started. Where is Reyes? Dominic said. Silence. I'll ask once more. I want a lawyer, Caruso said. His voice had gone flat and professional, the last retreat of a man who is out of other options. Dominic looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Hewitt. Get him out of here. Keep him in the building. Don't let him make any calls. Hewitt came in. Caruso went, not quietly but without physical resistance, which was its own kind of statement about how thoroughly the math had shifted. The man behind him went with Hewitt's people. The door closed again. The boardroom was quiet. Dominic stood at the head of the table with his hands at his sides and looked at the document spread across it and said nothing for a long time. Landon stood on one side of the table and Logan on the other, and neither of them moved. The city went on being the city outside the north windows, indifferent and continuous. Then Dominic looked at Landon. Then he looked at Logan. His face was doing something that none of the people in the organization who would have described themselves as knowing Dominic Falcone well had ever seen it do. It was not weakness, not exactly. It was the expression of a man encountering the full dimension of something he had done, in a room with the evidence of it standing in front of him with their mother's eyes. She never— He stopped. He tried again. She never told you to come here. She left us the choice, Landon said. She could have— His jaw tightened. She had all of this. She could have sent it years ago. Could have— She didn't do things to hurt you, Logan said. His voice was even. She did things to protect us. When protecting us and hurting you pointed in different directions, she chose protecting us. Every time. Dominic absorbed that. She raised you, he said. She did. Without— He pressed his mouth flat for a moment. Without telling you to hate me. She told us the truth, Landon said. As much of it as she had. She told us you were complicated. She told us the full story wasn't finished. He paused. She was right. Dominic looked at the table again. He picked up the document on top, the forgery evidence, the first lab report, and held it in both hands and looked at it the way a person looks at something they understand they are going to have to carry for the rest of their life. The door opened without a knock. Marcus Reyes came in fast, with 2 men behind him, and the expression on his face was not the calculated neutrality that Caruso had managed. It was something rawer, the face of a man who has just been told that his partner is being held on the 4th floor and has made a decision about what that means and what needs to happen next. He stopped when he saw Dominic. He stopped when he saw the documents. He stopped when he saw both of them, Landon and Logan, on opposite sides of the table, and whatever he'd walked into this room intending to do underwent a rapid and visible revision. "Marcus," Dominic said. Reyes looked at the brothers. His hand moved toward his jacket, and Landon said very calmly, "Hewitt's people are in the hallway. There are 6 of them. The building is locked down from the lobby up. Whatever you're reaching for, consider whether it improves your situation." Reyes's hand stopped. He looked at Dominic. His expression was trying to reassemble itself into something manageable and failing. "This is," he started. 17 years, Dominic said. "Vivian Carter, 2 boys. The DNA report, the Meridian property. Paul, the security guard you paid and then transferred out of the city 6 months later. The financial transfers." He looked at Reyes with the eyes of a man who has finally, irreversibly, stopped looking away. "All of it, Marcus. I know all of it. They brought it to me." Reyes looked at Landon. There was something in that look that was not afraid, not exactly. It was the specific look of a man who is very quickly computing options and finding them insufficient, but who has not yet arrived at the place where he stops computing. "You don't know everything," Reyes said. Landon felt something shift in the room. Beside him, he heard Logan go very still in the particular way that meant Logan was paying attention to something Landon hadn't caught yet. "Say that again," Logan said. Reyes looked at Logan. Something moved behind his eyes. Something that in a different man, in a better man, might have been shame, but in Reyes registered as a tactical decision about what to reveal and what to leverage. "The illness," Reyes said. The room went cold. Logan's voice was very quiet. "What about the illness?" Reyes looked at them both and made the calculation that a cornered man makes, not the calculation of escape, but the calculation of damage, of how much he could still cause, of whether the thing he was holding was worth more as currency than as a wound. "Your mother didn't get sick by accident," Reyes said. The silence that followed was the kind that doesn't feel like silence. It feels like the moment before something breaks, before the pressure that's been building in a sealed space finds the weakest point in the wall, and everything that's been contained comes through at once. Landon looked at the man across the table and felt something shift inside him that he did not have language for and would not have language for later. Not rage, not grief, though both were in it. Something more fundamental than either, something that had to do with his mother on a back porch in the evenings, watching the street go quiet. His mother at every appointment with her jaw set and her hands folded, his mother in a hospital bed with both of them on either side of her and the thin spring light coming through the window. And the 47 seconds after Logan was born when the room had held its breath. And the 6 weeks since she'd been gone, and every single thing she had built from nothing in 17 years, and the man standing across a table saying she didn't get sick by accident. Landon moved first, not toward Reyes, toward the table, both hands flat on the surface, leaning in, and his voice came out so controlled and so quiet that it was somehow louder than anything else in the room. "Say that again," he said, slowly. Reyes understood, in the way that people understand things when their body processes the information before their mind catches up, that he had miscalculated. He thought it was leverage. He thought dropping it into the room would buy him something. Confusion, delay, a shift in the emotional temperature that he could use. What he'd actually done was remove the last barrier between himself and the 2 people in this room who had the least reason to be careful with him. "It was a long program," Reyes said. He was still trying to control the narrative, still working it the way he worked everything, angling for the version of this conversation where he walked out with something intact. Low dose, extended over time, designed to look exactly like what it looked like. The oncologist never questioned it because there was nothing to question. The symptoms were consistent, the progression was consistent. Logan said, "Stop talking." His voice was different from Landon's. Where Landon's had gone cold and precise, Logan's had gone somewhere else entirely, somewhere very flat and very still. The voice of a person who is holding something down with everything they have and is not sure how long they can hold it. Reyes stopped. Dominic was standing at the head of the table and he had gone the color of concrete. Not pale, concrete, that specific gray of a man from whom something essential has been suddenly drained, leaving only structure. "Who else?" Dominic said. Reyes looked at him. What? Who else knew? Caruso. Who else? Two people who were involved in the execution. They're not in the city anymore. But they're alive, Dominic said. Yes. Dominic looked at Landon. The look communicated something that would have been impossible to put into language, but that Landon received with full clarity. An acknowledgement, a reckoning, the look of a man who understands that the scope of what was done is larger and more deliberate and more unforgivable than even the last 10 minutes had shown. Logan walked around the table. He walked directly toward Reyes and stopped 2 feet from him and looked at him, and Reyes, who had been in this organization for 20 years and had done things that most people couldn't survive knowing about themselves, took a half step back. She had 4 years, Logan said. His voice was still very quiet. She had 4 years and she spent them at every appointment, and she never once. He stopped. He pressed his teeth together. He breathed through his nose. She thought she was dying from cancer. She thought it was just the thing that was happening to her body. She thought that was what it was. Reyes said nothing. And you let her think that, Logan said. For 4 years. You let her believe she was just unlucky. It was business. Landon hit the table with his open palm. The sound cracked through the room like a board splitting, and every person in it flinched except Logan, who didn't move, who kept looking at Reyes with the specific, terrible steadiness of a person who has decided something and is simply waiting for the moment to act on it. Don't, Landon said. Don't say that word in this room. The door banged open. 2 men came through it, not Hewitt's people. Reyes's people. The 2 who'd been on the 3rd floor when the brothers arrived, who had apparently been waiting for a signal that had never come, and had made a decision about what that meant. They were inside the room before anyone could reposition, and the situation changed the way situations change in rooms when people with bad intentions enter them, immediately and entirely. One of them went for Logan. Landon moved without thinking, which was the only way to move in a moment like that. Thinking was a cost he didn't have. He came around the table and put himself between the man and his brother, and the man hit him in the ribs with something that wasn't a fist, a forearm, a driving forearm strike. And the pain was instantaneous and structural, the kind that tells you something may have shifted that shouldn't have shifted. Landon bent. He didn't go down. He grabbed the man's arm with both hands and used the bend, used the fact that he was already low, to drive upward, shoulder into the man's jaw, and the impact was enough to stagger him backward into the edge of the table. The second man had Dominic, or was trying to. What actually happened was that Dominic Falcone, who was 58 years old and had spent the last decade primarily behind a desk, turned out to still be Dominic Falcone, which meant he was faster than he looked and more willing to hurt someone than most people who hadn't met him would have predicted. He caught the man's wrist, turned it in a direction wrists don't prefer, and the man went sideways with a sound that was part pain and part surprise. Hewitt came through the door 30 seconds later with 2 of his people, and the room resolved itself in the way rooms resolve when the numbers have shifted past the point of ambiguity. Reyes hadn't moved. He was standing in the center of all of it with his hands at his sides, and the expression of a man who is watching the last viable path close and is now simply computing what exists on the other side of that. There was nothing on the other side of that. He knew it. The knowledge was in his face. Landon straightened. He was breathing hard, and his ribs were sending him specific, detailed information about themselves that he filed and set aside. He looked at Reyes, and Reyes looked back, and the thing between them in that moment was not anger, not anymore, not exactly. It was something older and more fundamental. The thing that exists between people when the full truth of what one of them has done to the other is fully visible to both of them, and there is nowhere left to hide it. Hewitt, Dominic said. Sir. Both of them. Same room as Caruso. Nothing in, nothing out. They took Reyes. He went without making it physical, which was either resignation or strategy, and at this point the distinction mattered less than the fact of him being gone from the room. The boardroom was very quiet. Landon sat down in the nearest chair because his ribs were insisting on it. Logan came to stand beside him and put his hand on Landon's shoulder and left it there. Dominic stood at the window with his back to both of them and looked out at the city for a long time. "How bad?" Logan said to Landon. Quiet. Just for him. "Sore," Landon said. "Nothing broken." "You don't know that." "Educated guess." Logan's hand tightened on his shoulder briefly, then he let go. "They'll have others," Dominic said, still at the window. "Caruso and Reyes have been running the operational side for 4 years. They have people at every level who are loyal to their money rather than to me. When word gets out that both of them are being held," he stopped. "And it will get out. It gets out fast. When it does, those people are going to make decisions about which way they want to fall." "How many?" Landon said. Dominic turned from the window. "Enough. The ones I'm certain of, the ones I know are mine. 12, maybe 15 people I'd trust in the next 6 hours. Everyone else is a question mark, and question marks are dangerous when the building is this unstable." "What about the authorities?" Logan said. A pause. The particular pause of a man who has spent his life on the wrong side of that word. "Pell," Logan said. "He has relationships, federal contacts. He mentioned it." "Pell is a civilian lawyer who keeps records to protect himself," Dominic said. He's been building a case for 9 years, Logan said, whether he meant to or not. What we brought today, combined with what he has, combined with testimony from the lab technician, that's enough. That was enough before Reyes opened his mouth in there. Now it's more than enough. Dominic looked at him. "If I invite federal involvement into this building, into this organization, you lose the organization," Landon said. "Everything built over, you lose it," Landon said again. "Yes. Or you give up control of it yourself to men who killed our mother, and you lose it that way instead, along with everything else." He looked at his father steadily. The pain in his ribs was sharp and clarifying. "There's no version of this where you keep it, Dominic. That's not what today is." The name landed differently than either of them expected. Not hostile. They hadn't earned the other word, and they all knew it. But not cold either. Something that was its own honest thing, the name of a man they were beginning to understand in real time, in a room full of everything he had done and everything that had been done to him. Dominic held Landon's gaze for a long moment. "I'll call Pell," he said. The next 3 hours were the most operationally complex of Landon's life, and he had nothing to compare them to. Pell arrived within 20 minutes, briefcase and a controlled urgency that was the lawyer version of running. He made calls from the boardroom that Landon and Logan stayed for and understood approximately 70% of, enough to know that Pell had not been exaggerating his federal contacts, enough to know that the 9 years of record-keeping had been thorough in ways that surprised even Dominic. Meanwhile, the building started to feel what was happening. It was a gradual thing, the way pressure changes before weather, a quality of awareness moving through the floors, a restlessness in the people who hadn't been in the boardroom but who understood, from the movement of Hewitt's people and the locked lobby and the 2 men who'd been escorted out of the 3rd floor, that something fundamental had shifted. 3 men on the 2nd floor made calls Hewitt's people flagged. One tried to leave through the parking structure and was stopped at the gate. 2 others came upstairs voluntarily, found Dominic, and stood on the side of the room where the answer was clear. Logan tracked all of it. He moved through the building with Hewitt for an hour, learning its current geometry, who was where, who was making what kind of eye contact, where the pressure was building. He came back to the boardroom and reported with the precision their mother had given him, and Dominic listened with the attention of a man who was adjusting his understanding of what these 2 young people were in real time. At 1:15, the first organized push came. Not from inside the building, from outside it. 3 cars. Men Caruso had on retainer who operated independently of the official organization structure and who had received a signal from someone with a phone they'd missed that sent a message before Hewitt's lockdown was complete. They came through the parking structure, which had a secondary entrance that Landon hadn't known about and Logan had. Logan had told Hewitt about it 40 minutes earlier. Hewitt's people were waiting. The confrontation in the parking structure was brief and loud and resulted in 2 of Hewitt's men sustaining injuries that were significant but not permanent, and all 3 cars being stopped, and 6 of Caruso's outside people being contained in the parking structure with zip ties and the specific expression of men who had been very sure about what they were walking into and were now being rapidly disabused. Landon heard it from the fourth floor. The sounds came up through the building, muffled and ugly, something breaking, something impacting, a shout cut short. He stood in the hallway outside the boardroom with his hand against the wall and listened and felt his heart working against his ribcage in a way that had nothing to do with the bruised ribs and everything to do with the fact that this was real. This was actual. This was not a document on a table or a voice on a phone, but the physical consequence of the thing they'd started by walking through the front door 24 hours ago. Logan appeared at the end of the hallway. "Parking structure," he said. "It's handled." "You're sure?" "Hewitt just called me." "How many hurt?" "Ours 2. Theirs more than 2. Logan walked toward him. He was moving with the particular focus of a person who is managing something very large inside themselves by refusing to stop moving. His face was controlled, but his eyes weren't. Not entirely. "There's going to be more. Reyes has contacts we don't have full inventory on. Caruso's been building his own network inside the organization for years. We don't know the full shape of it." "Pell's people are 30 minutes out," Landon said. "A lot can happen in 30 minutes. "I know." They stood in the hallway and looked at each other, and the thing between them was the same thing that had always been between them, the specific gravity of two people who have shared everything since before birth, who know each other below the level of language, who have been each other's primary witness for 17 years in a life that required witnesses. It had never felt more essential than right now, in this hallway, with the sounds of what they'd started still echoing up from below. "She would have hated this part," Logan said. "She would have understood it," Landon said. "Those aren't the same thing." "No," Landon agreed. "They're not." Dominic came out of the boardroom. He had his jacket off, sleeves rolled up, the posture of a man who has stopped performing composure and is simply occupying his own body in a moment of genuine crisis. He looked at both of them. "Reyes is asking to make a deal," he said. Logan turned. "What kind of deal?" "He says he knows where the two people who assisted with your mother are located. He'll give names, locations, full cooperation in exchange for consideration when the federal people arrive." A silence. "He doesn't get to make that deal," Landon said. "He's offering—" I heard what he's offering," Landon said. His voice had the cold precision back. "He poisoned our mother and watched her die over 4 years, and is now offering to trade the people who helped him do it in exchange for a lighter sentence. He doesn't get to negotiate that. The federal people can hear what he has to say and do whatever they do with it, but it's not a deal we make. It's not ours to make." Dominic looked at him. "The people he's giving up will be found," Logan said, "with or without Reyes. Pell's documentation is thorough. The technician is cooperating. The financial trail points to operational accounts that lead somewhere. Those people will be found." He looked at his father. "Don't give him anything." Dominic held their gaze for a moment, then he nodded once. He went back into the boardroom. Landon looked at the ceiling briefly, then back down. His ribs ached with every full breath, and he was taking shallow ones, and it wasn't enough oxygen, and he knew it and couldn't do much about it right now. "When this is over," Logan said. "I know, hospital. I was going to say food first." Despite everything, the ache, the noise still settling in the floors below, the 30 minutes that felt like 30 hours, Landon almost smiled. "Yeah, food first." De Chiqueta. The federal people arrived at 1:52. 4 of them initially, the advance presence of something larger that was being organized at a distance, the specific, efficiently contained energy of people who have been briefed on the way over and are walking into a situation they understand the general shape of, but not the specific texture. Pell met them in the lobby, and they went up together, and Landon and Logan remained in the boardroom and were not present for the first hour of whatever was happening down the hall. What they were present for was Dominic, who sat across the boardroom table from both of them for the first time without anyone else in the room and said nothing for a while. Logan had the gray box in front of him. He'd had it since the morning, carried it out of the hotel, up through the building, through everything. It was sitting on the table between them like the third presence it had always been, since the back of a closet shelf in a house 3 states away. She kept all of it, Dominic said. Everything she could find, Logan said. 17 years. Yes. Dominic put both hands on the table and looked at them. The face that had spent the morning rearranging itself in response to successive waves of information was done rearranging. What was left was something stripped down and unguarded in a way that a face has to be worn all the way through something before it can arrive at. I don't... He stopped. He tried again. There isn't language for what I did, what I allowed to happen, the way I... His jaw tightened. I looked at her face in that hallway, and she was telling me the truth. I knew she was telling me the truth, and I looked away because the document in my hand was easier to hold on to than what I knew. Landon said nothing. I threw her out, Dominic said. She was carrying you both, and I threw her out with nothing, and she walked away and built a life, and raised you and kept records for 17 years, and never... He pressed the back of his hand against his mouth for a moment. The same gesture Landon had read about from part 1, the same fracture in the containment. She never came after me. She could have. She had enough to ruin me 3 years in. She never used it. She wasn't interested in ruining you, Logan said. She was interested in raising us. I know. His voice was rough. I know that. That's... He stopped again. That's the thing I'm going to carry. The building settled around them. Down the hall, Pell's voice and other voices moved through rhythms that meant procedure, that meant the machinery of consequence engaging. Outside the north windows, the city continued, the sky still gray and held breath, the streets carrying their ordinary traffic. Landon looked at his father across the table and felt the complicated thing that had been building since the moment Dominic walked through the door. Not love, not yet, that was not a word available to this moment, but something honest, something that acknowledged the full weight of what this man was and what he'd failed at and what he was sitting here in front of now with his sleeves rolled up and nowhere left to hide. The people who assisted Reyes, Landon said, you're going to make sure they're found. Yes. Not as a favor, not as a negotiation, as a fact. Yes, Dominic said. As a fact. And the organization, Logan said. Dominic looked at him. When this is done, Logan said, when Caruso and Reyes are processed and the federal people have done what they're here to do, the organization. A long pause. I know what needs to happen, Dominic said. Say it, Landon said. Dominic looked at him, then at Logan, then back to the gray box sitting on the table between all of them. The 17 years of his wife's careful, relentless, loving documentation of a truth he'd refused to see. It ends, he said. All of it. Whatever's left of it after today, it ends. He looked at the table. It should have ended before it began. It definitely should have ended before... He didn't finish that sentence. He didn't need to. A shout from down the hall, then the sound of a door, then rapid footsteps, and Hewitt appeared in the boardroom doorway, and his face had the specific quality of a man carrying urgent information and deciding in real time how to carry it. Reyes got a message out, Hewitt said, before the lockdown. We don't know how. The men in the parking structure weren't the only group. There's a second team. He looked at Dominic. They're in the building. Dominic stood. Logan was already moving toward the door. Landon pushed up from his chair, and his ribs sent him a full and detailed protest, and he ignored it completely and moved, because his brother was moving, and his father was moving, and whatever was coming through this building toward this room was coming now, and there was no version of the next 60 seconds that permitted him to be sitting down. The lights went out, all of them, all at once, the building going fully dark in a single instant, and in the sudden black Landon heard three things simultaneously. Hewitt's voice saying something into a radio, a sound from the floor below that was heavy and structural and wrong, and Logan, right beside him, close enough to touch, saying his name in the dark, with a steadiness that was the most familiar sound in the world. I'm here, Landon said. Stay close. Always. And in the dark, in the building that had once been the center of an empire that had destroyed their family, with their father somewhere to their left and 17 years of consequence crashing toward a conclusion that none of them could fully see yet, The two of them stood together and held and waited for what was coming to come. The dark lasted 11 seconds. Landon counted them without meaning to, the way you count things when your body is running on adrenaline and your mind needs something to grip. 1, 2. The sound from the floor below, heavier now, a door or a wall, something structural giving way. 3, 4. Hewitt's radio crackling with a voice that was trying to stay professional and not entirely succeeding. 5, 6. Logan's shoulder against his in the dark, solid and real, the most reliable coordinate in any space Landon had ever occupied. 7, 8. His father's breathing somewhere to the left, controlled, the breathing of a man who has been in dark rooms before and knows the first rule is, don't move until you know what you're moving toward. 9, 10, 11. The emergency lighting came on, red-tinted, sparse, the kind of light that shows you shapes and edges and not much else. The boardroom materialized around them in shades of dark and darker, the table a long shadow, the north windows showing the city outside still bright and indifferent. Hewitt said, "Second stairwell, they're on 3. Dominic said, "How many?" 4 confirmed, possibly more. Dominic looked at his sons in the red light, and something passed between all 3 of them that didn't require words. A compression of the situation into its essential facts, a shared and instantaneous understanding of what the next few minutes required. "Stay behind Hewitt's people," Dominic said. "No," Landon said. "You're 17. We didn't come this far to stand behind someone else," Logan said. His voice was the same quiet it had been all day, the quiet that wasn't calm but was something more durable than calm. The voice of a person who has decided something at a level deeper than decision-making, who is now simply executing. "Tell us what you need." Dominic looked at them for 2 seconds. Then he looked at Hewitt. "Give them something to work with." Hewitt handed Landon a radio. He gave Logan a position. The hallway junction between the boardroom and the secondary stairwell, where the building's layout created a natural choke point, a place where anyone coming up from 3 to 4 had to pass through a space approximately 4 feet wide with no cover on either side. Logan looked at the layout Hewitt sketched on a notepad by the red emergency light and nodded once and moved. Landon went with him. They didn't discuss it. They had been moving together since before they could walk, and the coordination between them was not a thought, but a fact. The hallway outside the boardroom was darker than inside, the emergency strip lighting running along the baseboard giving just enough illumination to navigate by. They moved to the junction and stopped, backs to the wall on the boardroom side, listening to the building below them do things buildings do when people are moving through them with bad intentions. Small sounds, weight sounds, the specific acoustics of people trying to be quiet and not quite succeeding. "How many do you think actually came through?" Logan said. Barely a murmur. "Hewitt said 4 confirmed," Landon said. "In this building, against what's already up here, 4 is either arrogance or desperation." "Or both," Logan said. "Or both," Landon agreed. The stairwell door at the end of the hallway opened. The first man through it moved fast and low with the practiced efficiency of someone who has done this before, and he made it 6 steps before he registered the 2 figures at the junction and stopped. In the red emergency half-light, the 3 of them looked at each other across 40 feet of corridor, and the man's calculation took about 1 second and resulted in him reaching for something at his hip. Hewitt came through the door behind the man. What followed was fast and ugly, and not cinematic in the way that people imagine confrontations to be cinematic. No clean geometry, no clear choreography. It was bodies in a hallway, impacts and sounds that the body makes when it is treated badly, grunts, and the specific thud of someone's back finding a wall. Landon moved into it because standing still was not an option his body was willing to consider, and because the man who had come through the door had gotten past Hewitt in the scuffle and was now in the junction, and the junction was where Logan was. He hit the man from the left with his shoulder, the same shoulder he'd used in the boardroom, and the pain from his ribs detonated up through his chest like something electrical, and he did not stop because stopping was also not available to him. They went into the wall together, the man and Landon, and the wall won, and the man went down and stayed there. Landon stood over him breathing in short, careful increments because the long ones were beyond him right now. Logan appeared at his elbow. "You're hurt." "Later." "Landon." Later. He straightened. How many came through? Hewitt was already on the radio. 2 of the 4 had been stopped in the stairwell by Falcone loyalists positioned there on Hewitt's instruction. 1 was down in the hallway. The 4th had gone the other direction, away from the 4th floor and up, toward the roof access on 5. Reyes, Dominic said. He was in the hallway now, behind them. He'd want Reyes. Someone's going to get him out, Hewitt said, or try to. Roof access, Logan said. There's a service helicopter pad. It's not active, but a helicopter doesn't need it to be active. Everyone looked at him. I read the building schematics this morning, Logan said, in the tone of a person who considers this an obvious thing to have done. While Landon was in the lobby with Caruso, Dominic was already moving toward the stairwell. Hewitt went with him and one of his people. Landon followed and Logan followed Landon, and the 4 of them went up the last flight in the red-lit stairwell with the sounds of the building resolving below them. Voices, radio communications, the specific quality of noise that means a situation is being contained rather than escalating. The roof access door was unlocked. It opened onto a service level, a flat expanse of utility equipment and ventilation housing under the open sky, which after the red-lit interior of the building felt enormous and gray and shockingly cold. The overcast sky sat low above them. The city spread in every direction at the building's height. The 4th man was there. He was at the roof's edge with a phone to his ear, making a call that was clearly not going well based on his expression. And when the door opened, he turned and the phone came down, and his expression rearranged itself into something that did the math on what he was looking at. 4 people, one of whom was Dominic Falcone, and arrived at a number he didn't like. He ran the phone call outcome analysis in about 2 seconds and put the phone in his pocket and put his hands up. Smart, Hewitt said. It was done. What? It didn't feel done. That was the thing Landon hadn't expected and couldn't have prepared for. The way the conclusion of something enormous doesn't announce itself as a conclusion. There was no moment where the building exhaled, no shift in the air that said, "This is over now." There was just the roof and the man with his hands up, and the city below, and his own breathing in short, careful increments, and the pain in his ribs that had been waiting patiently all day to be fully felt, and was now presenting its complete accounting. He sat down on the roof. Not dramatically. He sat down because his legs suggested it, and he agreed with them. Logan sat beside him. They looked out over the city together in the gray afternoon and said nothing for a while, which was fine, which was enough. Below them, things were happening. The federal people had expanded their presence. Pell was coordinating something on 3 phones simultaneously. Caruso and Reyes were in a location Hewitt controlled, and within the hour they would be in a location the federal people controlled, and after that they would be in a location that neither Hewitt, nor the federal people, nor anyone in the Falcone organization had ever had any say over, and they would remain in that location for a very long time. The 2 people who had assisted Reyes with their mother, their names came out of Reyes within 40 minutes of federal custody, which was a faster capitulation than anyone expected, and said something about the depth of Reyes's actual loyalty to anything beyond himself. One was in another state, living under a name that wasn't quite a lie but wasn't quite true either. The other was overseas. They would be found. The machinery for finding them was already running. It would take time, but it would happen, and Landon and Logan would know when it did, because Pell would make sure they knew. These were facts. They were the facts of the situation. Landon held them one at a time and turned them over and found that they felt less like victory than like the aftermath of a storm. The particular exhausted clarity of a landscape that has been through something and is now simply what it is. She knew, Logan said eventually. Landon looked at him. About Reyes. About what he'd done to her. Logan was looking at the city, not at Landon. His voice was its usual quiet, but there was something underneath it that was closer to the surface than usual. She knew something wasn't right with the progression. She told me, the last few months, she told me there were things about the timeline that didn't track to what the doctors were saying. She thought she was reading into it. She thought she was afraid and making patterns out of the fear. She didn't know, Landon said. She suspected, Logan said, and she didn't tell us because she thought it would make us angry in a way that wasn't useful, and she was managing us right up until the end. He stopped. He pressed his lips together. She was always managing us toward the best version of whatever the situation was. Landon felt the grief hit him then, in a way it hadn't been able to hit him all day, clean and full and enormous. The grief of a person who has been in motion since 6 in the morning and is only now still enough to feel the weight of what has been underneath the motion. He felt it in his chest alongside the pain in his ribs, and he let it be there. He didn't push it away. Their mother had not raised them to push things away. She'd raised them to feel what was true and carry it honestly. She would have known what to do with this, Landon said. All of it. She'd have had notes. Logan almost laughed. It came out wrong, cracked, but it was something. She'd have had a binder, he said, color-coded. They sat with that for a while. Dominic found them on the roof 20 minutes later. He came through the access door and stopped when he saw them sitting against the ventilation housing and looked at them the way he'd been looking at them all day. With the specific attention of a man who is trying to see as much as possible, as fast as possible, because he understands, at some level beneath calculation, that he doesn't have the right to assume there will be unlimited opportunities. He came and sat on the other side of Landon, not close. A few feet of distance that acknowledged it wasn't his right to close it. The three of them sat in the gray afternoon above the city, and the silence between them was not empty. It was full of things that didn't have language yet, things that might develop language over time, or might always exist just beneath it, which was its own kind of communication. "The hospital is sending someone," Dominic said, "for your ribs." I said I was fine. "You're holding your left side every time you move, and you've been breathing shallow since the boardroom," Dominic said. "You can be fine after someone looks at it." Landon said nothing, which was the closest he was willing to come to concession. "Pell has a timeline, Chick," Dominic said, "for the federal process. It will take months in some form or another. There will be testimony from both of you, if you're willing, not required, but useful." "We'll testify," Logan said. "There will be a period where my name is very visible," Dominic said, "and by extension yours. I want you to understand what that means before—" "We've had our name visible before," Landon said. "We grew up with the Falcone name hanging over everything our mother did, everything she built, and she built it anyway." He looked at his father. "We can handle visible." Dominic absorbed that. He looked at the city. "The estate," he said. "The main estate. I'm going to need to—" "There will be a legal process around the assets. Most of it will go to the federal process. What remains—" He paused. "I want it handled in a way that is consistent with how your mother would have handled it." "What does that mean to you?" Logan said. "Legitimate," Dominic said. "Clean. Whatever comes out of this on the other side has to be something that couldn't be questioned. Something that doesn't require people to look away from how it was built." He paused. "She understood money. Better than anyone in the organization. Better than me. She would have known how to take what's left and make it into something that—" He stopped. "I don't know if this matters to you. It might not. You haven't had reason to care about what I do with any of this." "It matters," Logan said. "Careful. Honest. Not because we want it, but because of what you do with it is how we know who you actually are now, not who you say you are." Dominic looked at him. "Fair," he said. "In her memory," Landon said. "Whatever you build, if you build anything, it has to be in her name." "Yes," Dominic said, without hesitation. "Yes, that was always going to be the condition." The hospital confirmed 2 cracked ribs, which Landon received as information with the expression of a man who is unsurprised and will do nothing different as a result. They wrapped him and gave him something for the pain that he took because Logan stood there until he took it, and then they drove back to the hotel in a car that Dominic's people had provided, and they sat in the room with the gray box on the desk and the documents they'd carried from 3 states away, and the city outside the window moved through its evening as if nothing had happened. Logan made a call to a woman who had been their neighbor for 9 years and who had been the closest thing to a grandmother they'd had, and he told her what he could, and she cried a little, and he let her and said appropriate things and meant them. Landon called Pell and went through the next day logistics in the flat efficient language of people managing something large and complex, and Pell's voice on the phone had a quality it hadn't had that morning. Lighter, fractionally, the sound of a man who has paid something he owed and found the pain, however late, less heavy than the carrying. They ate at the same diner on the corner. Same table, same terrible coffee, same smell of grease and decades. The waitress didn't know them. She refilled their cups without being asked. Outside the window, the evening traffic moved through its rhythms, people heading somewhere or leaving somewhere, the ordinary machinery of lives being lived. "What do we do now?" Logan said. Not anxiously, just the question. "We go home," Landon said. "There are things we need to stay for." "Not yet. We go home first. We take her box and her letters, and we go home and we sit in the house she built for us, and we do whatever the next thing is." He wrapped his hands around his cup. "She didn't raise us to live inside this city and this story. She raised us to go out and make something. That's what we do." "Eventually," Logan said. "Eventually," Landon agreed. "And him," Logan said. He didn't look up from his cup. "Dominic." "What about him?" "We can't just—" Logan paused. He was choosing words with his usual precision, but the choosing was taking longer than usual. "She told us she didn't want us to carry hate. She told us truth was worth the cost. She gave us the choice of what to do with everything she'd gathered. We made the choice, and we're here, and it's done. Or mostly done." He looked up. "But we can't pretend this is something it isn't. He's not. He's not our father in any way that matters yet." "Yet," Landon said. "Yet," Logan said. "That's the word I'm working with. I don't know what it becomes, but I'm not closing the door." "Neither am I," Landon said. "That's enough for now." Logan looked out the window. "She would say that's enough for now." "I know. She'd also say don't let the coffee get cold." Landon drank his coffee. 3 days later, before they left the city, they went to see Dominic one more time. Not at the building. The building was in the middle of a process that would take months to complete. People coming in and going out, documents and testimony, and the grinding institutional machinery of consequence. They met at a different location, a neutral space Pell had arranged, a conference room in a building that had no connection to any of the people involved, clean and anonymous and adequate for what needed to happen. Dominic was already there when they arrived. He had the look of a man who had not been sleeping much, which was both expected and honest. He had a folder in front of him, and he pushed it across the table when they sat down. "The foundation documents," he said. "Initial structure. Pell helped draft them. It's in her name. The Vivian Carter Foundation. The purpose is broad enough to evolve. Education support. Health access. Crisis housing for women and children." He paused. "The initial endowment comes from the liquid assets that will survive the federal process. It's not everything. It's enough to start something real." Landon opened the folder. He read. Logan read over his shoulder. The language was legal and careful, and underneath the legal language, the intention was clear and clean. At the top of the first page, in the space reserved for the founding statement, someone had typed a single line that was not legal language, was not procedural, was just the plain statement of a thing. "Established in memory of Vivian Carter, who built something lasting from nothing, and who never stopped believing the truth was worth whatever it cost." Landon read it twice. He closed the folder. "The board of directors," Logan said. "Who sits on it?" "That's open," Dominic said. "I'd like it to include people your mother would have chosen. I don't know who those people are." "You do." "Grace," Landon said. "The woman she rented a room from. When she first left. She's retired and 70 years old and the sharpest person I know, aside from the person sitting next to me." "Anyone else?" "Not yet," Logan said. "We'll build it the way she built things, carefully and with the right people and without rushing." Dominic nodded. A silence. "She wrote you a letter," Logan said. Dominic went very still. "She wrote a lot of letters near the end," Logan said, "to people she thought deserved to know what she knew. Most of them are in the box. This one—" He reached into his jacket and produced an envelope, plain white, sealed, a name on the front in their mother's careful handwriting. Dominic. Just that. No last name, no title, just the name she'd been using for him in her own mind for 17 years. She gave it to Landon 3 days before she died. She said if we came here and if things came out the way she hoped they might, we should give it to you. Logan set the envelope on the table. Dominic looked at it. He looked at it for a long time without touching it, the way you look at something you know will cost you, and are taking a moment to agree to that cost before you pick it up. We'll step out, Landon said. No, Dominic said. Stay. He picked up the envelope. He opened it with the same deliberate care he'd used on the DNA report 17 years ago. The same hands, older now and different in ways that mattered, and he read what was inside. Neither of them could see what was written. They didn't try. They sat with their hands on the table and let him read. It took about 2 minutes. The letter was not long. Their mother had never used 2 words where one would do. When he finished, he set it down, face down, on the table in front of him. He put his hands flat on the surface. He looked at the wall across the room. Whatever the letter said, it had done the thing their mother's things tended to do. It had found the true thing and stated it without softening it, and left the recipient with no option except to sit in the full weight of it. They waited. After a while, Dominic said, "She told me she didn't forgive me." Neither of them spoke. "She said forgiveness wasn't something she owed me, and she wasn't going to pretend otherwise," he said. "She said she'd spent 17 years not hating me because hating me would have cost her things she needed for raising them, for raising you, and she'd made the practical decision not to waste the resource." He paused. "She said if I wanted to build something in her name, to build it because it was right, not because I thought it would redeem me. She said redemption was not the point." "Sounds like her," Landon said. And then she said, his voice shifted by a degree that was almost imperceptible and entirely audible. "She said she hoped I could look at our sons and see what she saw. She said what she saw was worth whatever any of it had cost. She said that was the closest she could come to a gift." The room was quiet. Outside the anonymous windows, the city moved through its afternoon. Somewhere below them, traffic and footsteps and the 10,000 small sounds of people living inside their ordinary lives, unaware of the room above them and what was sitting in it. Landon looked at the envelope face down on the table. He thought about his mother's handwriting, the careful precision of it, the same precision that had organized 17 years of documents in a gray cardboard box, that had annotated financial records in the margins with a single line of clean observation, that had written letters to people who needed to hear the truth even when it cost her something to tell it. He thought about her on the back porch in the evenings. He thought about the 47 seconds. He thought about the way she'd looked at both of them near the end, during the difficult weeks, with an expression that was entirely absent of self-pity, entirely focused outward, as if what she was thinking about in those moments was not what was happening to her, but what was going to happen to them after. What was going to happen to them after was this. This room, this table, these 3 people, this impossible and necessary conversation. She had known it might be. She had prepared for it as carefully as she prepared for everything. He thought she would not want him to be sitting still right now. He looked at his brother. Logan was looking back at him with the face that meant he'd arrived at the same place from a different direction, which was how they arrived at most places. "We need to get home," Landon said. "Yes," Logan said. They stood. Dominic stood. The 3 of them stood in the conference room of a neutral building in a city that would be, after today, a different kind of presence in their lives. Not the wound it had been, not fully known yet, something between. Dominic looked at his sons. "I don't know how to—" He stopped. Started again. "I'm going to need time to understand how to be whatever I am in your lives. If I'm anything." "You have time," Logan said. "You don't owe me that." "No," Landon said. "We don't." He looked at his father with his mother's exactness, the precision she'd handed him that was the most useful thing he owned. "But she didn't raise us to close doors without reason, and we're not going to start now." He picked up the gray box from the seat beside him. "When things are settled, when the process is done and the foundation is running and some amount of time has passed, call Pell. He'll know how to reach us." "And if you find that you can't," Logan said, That's also a true thing, and we'll understand it. Dominic nodded. He didn't say anything else. There wasn't anything else to say that the three of them hadn't just said, in the language of people who are learning each other at the same time they're learning themselves, which is the hardest kind of learning and the only kind that sticks. And sit. They drove home in the same car they'd driven out in, the gray box in the back seat, the city falling away behind them through the rear-view mirror, and then the highway opening out ahead in the flat gray afternoon light. Landon drove the first stretch. Logan sat in the passenger seat with the window cracked 2 inches, the cold air coming in, and they were quiet for a long time in the way they had been quiet on the way out. Not empty, full of things that were still finding their shapes. Around the 2-hour mark, Logan said, "She was right." "About what specifically?" Landon said. "About the truth. About it being worth whatever it costs." Landon thought about that. He thought about his ribs, taped and aching, and the roof and the red-lit hallway, and the boardroom table covered in 17 years of their mother's careful work. He thought about the line at the top of the foundation document. He thought about the envelope, face down. "She was usually right," he said. "Usually," Logan said. "Not always." When was she wrong? Logan thought about it seriously, the way he thought about most things. "She thought I was better at parallel parking than you," he said. That was wrong. Landon almost laughed. His ribs objected. He laughed anyway, briefly, carefully, the laugh of a person whose body is making a good faith effort to continue being a person despite its complaints. The highway carried them forward. Behind them the city sat in its gray afternoon, doing what cities do, absorbing what had happened inside it and continuing, carrying it forward in the way places carry everything, in the layers of things that happened here and the things that were built afterward, and the slow, incremental work of making something out of the wreckage. Ahead of them, 3 states away, a house stood with a garden that would need attention and rooms that held the evidence of a life built from nothing by a person who understood that the most important things you pass to the people you love are not possessions or money or name, but the specific knowledge of what truth costs and why it is worth paying. They drove into the evening. The gray box sat in the back seat between them, smaller than everything it contained, ordinary as a thing could be, holding the full weight of a story that was not finished. That would not be finished, not really, not for years, but that had arrived at the place where the carrying of it could begin. That was enough. For now, and perhaps for a long time after, that was exactly enough.